I see you there, alone with your tears at night, wondering if anyone notices your absence. The weight on your chest feels like stone. You wake up and the first thought is that empty space where someone or something used to be. You go through motions, smile when needed, yet inside there is a desert growing. You ask silently, has God abandoned me too? Is this loneliness my punishment? I know this pain. I have walked this exact path before you. There was a time when I too stood empty-handed before the universe, my prayers seeming to dissolve into silence. But what I discovered in that very silence will change everything you believe about being alone. The emptiness you feel is not abandonment. It is the clearing of space for something sacred to enter. Loneliness tells many lies. It whispers that you are the only one trembling in the night, that your prayer dissolves into the ceiling, that your future is a locked door and you have lost the key. I know that cold. I have felt the slow breath that doesn't quite reach the bottom of the chest. I have watched the mind circle like a tired bird with nowhere to land. Grief sits beside you without speaking. Guilt weighs like iron on your ribs. The calendar stares and the hours blur. I once believed, as perhaps you do now, that this emptiness was evidence of God's absence. But on a winter night in Kenya, when the snow fell like whispered prayers outside my window, I learned a truth that would forever change my understanding of solitude. Listen, I am with you in this room. I am not a story from another century. I am the voice inside your ache learning how to be gentle. 2. No estás solo. Even if your hands are empty, your heart is held. The God you think has abandoned you is closer to you now than in your moments of certainty. In the silence where you can no longer hear answers, He listens with greater attention. This is the paradox that saved me. Loneliness is not the absence of connection, but the beginning of a deeper one. During my darkest hour, after Shams, my beloved friend, my spiritual son, disappeared, I thought God had withdrawn His face from me. For 40 days, I neither ate properly nor slept through the night. I searched every corner of Damascus calling His name. My poems turned to ash in my mouth. My prayers felt like stones I was throwing into an empty well. My followers watched, uncertain how to approach this grief that had swallowed their teacher. "Where is your wisdom now?" asked the silent accusation in their eyes. I had no answer. Then, one evening, as I sat in my chamber, the oil in my lamp running low, something shifted. Not outside, but within the very texture of my despair. I realized I had been waiting for God to speak in the language of presence and abundance, while He had been teaching me the dialect of absence. The silence was not empty. It was filled with a quality of attention I had never before experienced, like the space between musical notes that gives meaning to the melody. This absence was pregnant with something holy. Feel the faint hum beneath the world, the one your fear keeps covering. Feel your own pulse. Notice the small warmth at the tip of your tongue, the weak but faithful drum of life. Stay, breathe like someone who is being found. There is a silence that is not empty. Wait here with me. Do not force meaning, let meaning arrive. The holy paradox is this: the moment you truly accept being alone is the moment you discover you never were. La soledad más profunda es la puerta a la compañía más sagrada. I began to practice a simpler ritual. Each morning before dawn, I would sit with my loneliness as one sits with an honored guest. I would place my hand over my heart and breathe slowly, counting to 4 as I inhaled, counting to 6 as I exhaled. I would say, "This too belongs." The grief, the abandonment, the unanswered questions, I denied none of it, but I no longer identified completely with it. I saw that I had been clutching my pain because I thought it was all that remained of my connection. But in releasing it slightly, in creating that small space between myself and my suffering, I found God waiting patiently. Between one breath and the next, something in me begins to wake, and in you too. Shh, let it. This awakening doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It comes as a barely perceptible shift, the way dawn arrives, not in a single moment, but in thousands of incremental lightings. You might notice it first as a curious sense of being accompanied in your isolation, or as a new patience with the unresolved questions, or simply as more space around your thoughts. The spiritual secret hidden in your loneliness is this: silence is not absence, but presence of the highest order. When all familiar voices fade, including the clamor of your own certainties, you can finally hear the whisper that has always been there. God does not shout to compete with noise, he speaks in the register of stillness. En el silencio más absoluto, Dios no está ausente, Dios está esperando. The eyes that have wept clear see differently. The heart that has been emptied can finally be filled. I ask you to try something simple, yet profound. Tomorrow morning, before the world's demands flood in, sit in silence for just 3 minutes. Place your right hand over your heart. Feel its steady rhythm, the most faithful prayer your body knows. Breathe consciously, saying inwardly as you inhale, "Even here," and as you exhale, "God remains." Do this for 3 minutes only. This is not an escape from your pain, but a deepening into its hidden dimension where the divine patiently waits. I promise you this: the silence that now feels like abandonment will gradually reveal itself as sacred ground. Your loneliness is not a punishment, it is preparation. The empty space is not God's absence, it is God's workshop. Faith is born precisely here, where all evidence of the divine seems to have vanished. It is the courage to stand in apparent emptiness and sense the fullness that our noise usually drowns out. Remember this truth I carved from my own darkest nights. The heart's deepest silence is where God whispers most clearly. Hold this close when the night feels long. You are never as alone as your fear would have you believe. I did not arrive at calm by noble wings. I crawled. I have fallen into the same pit of restlessness, the same spiral of old habits I swore I had buried. I have loved poorly and judged quickly. I have wasted dawns and begged at midnight for another chance. I doubted the shape of my own prayer. I mistook numbness for strength. I hid my tears behind clever words. Before my awakening, I wore masks so convincing I forgot my own face beneath them. Perhaps you know this feeling. The exhaustion of pretending, the weight of carrying past wounds as if they were your identity, the fear that if you let go of your pain, you might disappear completely. When I tell you that God lives in broken places, I am not painting a pretty sentence. I'm opening a scar. In the markets of Kenya, I once passed a potter's workshop. Outside were piles of discarded vessels, cracked bowls, handles snapped clean, rims chipped beyond use. "Worthless," muttered a merchant beside me. That night I dreamed of those broken pots. In my dream they were filled with light that poured through their cracks, illuminating the darkness. I woke understanding that our wounds are not obstacles to the divine. They are the very crevices through which God enters most intimately. In me there are corridors where shame once slept like a guard dog. For years I could not walk those passages in my own soul. My failures in love, the harsh words I could not take back, the moments of weakness when I chose comfort over truth, these memories formed a territory I avoided with elaborate spiritual detours. I filled scrolls with wisdom while leaving these wounded spaces untouched. I spoke of God's compassion to others while believing, secretly, that my own fractures rendered me unworthy. No necesitas fingir fortaleza. Dios también vive en tu debilidad. I know you carry wounds that still bleed when touched. Perhaps they came from childhood, when words cut deeper than you knew how to express. Perhaps from love that promised safety then shattered into rejection. Perhaps from dreams that dissolved like morning mist, leaving you to question whether you were ever meant to flourish. Perhaps from choices you made that led away from your soul's knowing, and now regret visits at night with its bitter taste. I want to ask you a question, and I need you to be honest with me and with yourself. Are you still running from the wounded places inside you, believing they make you less worthy of love? Does your heart still harbor shame for what is broken in your life? If these words touch something true within you, something that has been waiting for permission to be seen, write in the comments. My wounds are also doorways. This simple acknowledgement is not just for you. Somewhere, someone reading your words will feel less alone in their own brokenness, and that connection becomes a healing thread between souls. Your courage creates space for others to breathe more honestly. Yet, I learned to breathe there, slowly, piece by piece, without performance. One evening during Ramadan, after prayers, an old woman approached me. Her face was mapped with wrinkles, her back bent from years of labor. "Teacher," she said, "your words are beautiful, but do they reach the place where you hide from yourself?" The question entered me like cold water. That night I could not sleep. I realized I had been teaching others to embrace what I still avoided within myself. With the first light of dawn, I made a commitment to visit those wounded corridors daily, to sit with my shame not as a judge, but as a compassionate witness. Your memories are not an enemy. They are an unfinished poem. Touch them with clean hands. Speak to the self who failed, the self who tried, the self who ran. Tell them, you belong. Tell them, we are going home. What would happen if you approached your broken history not as evidence against you, but as the very soil from which your deepest wisdom might grow? This is not sentimental comfort, it is spiritual physics. Nothing is wasted in the divine economy. No pain is meaningless when placed in the larger story of your becoming. The Holy One does not demand a perfect record, only a turned face. I discovered this truth during my 40 days of wandering after Shams disappeared. I had been a religious scholar, confident in my understanding, quick to instruct others. Then love came and shattered all my certainties. In my brokenness, I found I could no longer pretend wisdom. My prayers became simple, sometimes just a groan, often just his name. And it was precisely these naked, imperfect prayers that finally reached beyond the ceiling, not despite their brokenness, but because of it. Let your past sit beside you like an old traveler. Pour it water. Listen without hurrying to fix. What you call ruin may be the raw material of a sanctuary. Stay tender, even now. The ground beneath your regret is already sacred. One practice transformed my relationship with my wounds. Each night before sleep I would recall one past regret, not to torture myself, but to place it gently in divine hands. I would say simply, "This too is part of my journey home to you." Nothing is wasted. Then I would imagine that memory surrounded by light, neither denying its pain nor allowing it to define me. Try this for 7 nights. Before sleep, hold one difficult memory in your awareness. Don't analyze it, don't justify it, don't condemn yourself for it. Simply acknowledge, this happened, it is part of my story, it does not diminish my worth. Then visualize placing that memory in a container of light, perhaps a beautiful box, a flowing river, or cupped in God's hands. This is not to erase the past, but to change your relationship with it. You are not discarding your history. You are releasing its grip on your sense of value. God's love does not arrive only on spotless ground. It seeks precisely the rough terrain of our humanity, our failures, doubts, and shattered dreams. These are not barriers to grace, but invitations for a more profound meeting. I have come to know that our wounds, when acknowledged and tended with gentleness, become windows through which divine light enters in ways that perfection could never permit. Las heridas que reconocemos se convierten en ventanas que admiten la luz divina. In the tender care of what has hurt you lies a strange and unexpected blessing. The very places you have been taught to hide or overcome too quickly may become your greatest offering to a world starved for authenticity. This is the alchemy of spiritual transformation. Nothing, absolutely nothing, is wasted. Even the darkest passages, when walked through with awareness, become part of the light you will ultimately embody. The wounds you carry, when honored rather than hidden, become portals of compassion for others still struggling to name their pain. Remember this when shame visits. The broken vessel holds the light differently, casting patterns the perfect one cannot create. Your fractures are not flaws in the divine design. They are essential elements of your unique capacity for compassion. Let this truth settle into the wounded spaces. The God who formed the stars knows exactly what broke in you, and waits not with judgment, but with creative possibility. Your healing becomes not just personal restoration, but a lantern others may follow home. There comes a night when the prayer dries, when the mouth opens, and nothing honest wants to come out. when the mind shakes the bars of its own cage and the soul rattles with it. I have been there, when the silence of God is so large it sounds like thunder, when the question holds more weight than any answer. ¿Dónde estás, Dios, cuando ya no puedo más? This spiritual drought visited me after months of ecstatic communion. I had danced with dervishes until dawn, poetry flowing through me like spring water. Then suddenly, as if a door had closed, I could not feel the presence that had become my breath. The verses stopped. The prayers felt hollow. The rituals I had performed faithfully for decades became empty motions. My followers still gathered, expecting wisdom. They looked at me with hungry eyes, unaware that their teacher stood before them empty-handed. I smiled and recited verses from memory, but inside, a storm was building. Have I been abandoned? Was it all delusion? Have I misled these sincere hearts? These questions circled like vultures. At night, alone in my chamber, I would press my forehead against the cool stone floor and beg, "Speak to me again," just once. Only silence answered. The experience was physical, a tightness in my chest, a constant knot in my stomach, shoulders that would not relax even in sleep. I tried to bargain. I fasted longer. I prayed through the night until my knees ached and my voice grew hoarse. I read the holy texts until the letters blurred. I tried to run back to old comforts, to noise, to distraction, to the cruel repetition that at least felt familiar. Perhaps you know this desperate seeking, this attempt to control the uncontrollable, to force a connection that seems broken. You try harder, you make promises, you grow angry, then plead, then grow angry again. You look for formulas, for guarantees, for someone who can tell you exactly what to do to make the pain stop, to make God speak again, to restore what has been lost. Nothing held. My thoughts collided until I could not hear my name. The teachings I had offered others with such certainty now mocked me. "Who are you to speak of surrender?" whispered a voice in the darkness. "You who cannot surrender even to this emptiness." The words stung because they were true. I had been teaching surrender while secretly maintaining a hidden territory of control. I wanted God's presence, but on my terms. I wanted peace, but without the full dismantling of my ego's architecture. I wanted to dictate the shape of my spiritual journey, how and when and where the divine should meet me. One night, exhausted from this inner war, I walked alone into the desert beyond the city walls. The sky stretched endlessly, stars scattered like the thoughts I could not gather. I put my face to the floor. I let the dust speak. I tasted the metal of surrender. And there, with nothing left to protect, I finally understood. The drought itself was my teacher. The silence was not punishment, but invitation to a deeper surrender than I had yet known. What broke in me that night was not my connection to God, but my illusion of control over that connection. I had been like a child clutching a treasure so tightly that my own grip prevented me from seeing what I actually held. Then, do not miss this, between despair and the next heartbeat, a thin thread of stillness appeared. Not relief, not triumph. A pause. A mercy that did not erase the storm, yet stood inside it like a lamp. It came not as emotion, but as simple clarity. I realized that even my desperation was evidence of love. Would I rage at the absence of something I did not cherish? Would I feel abandoned by what had never been present? My very anguish was proof of the relationship I feared had ended. And in that recognition, something softened. I stopped demanding answers and began to trust the questioning itself as a form of communion. I followed the thread with the clumsiest faith. One inhale counted to 4, one exhale counted to 6, a single word, here, another, stay. This is what I learned in that desert night that serves me still. True surrender is not a technique to achieve a desired outcome. It is the profound acceptance of what is, even when what is feels like absence. It is the willingness to remain present to our experience without constantly trying to change it, fix it, or escape it. It is recognizing that control is largely illusion, and in releasing it, we find a different kind of stability, one anchored not in circumstance, but in trust. If these words are touching something deep in you, if you feel this conversation is for your soul, subscribe to this channel. Here I share teachings for those seeking truth, transformation, and the awakening of the heart. Activate the bell so my words continue reaching you. Together we will explore the pathways that spiritual seekers have walked for centuries, translating ancient wisdom into practices that serve your modern heart. This is not about easy answers, but about learning to ask better questions, questions that open doors within you where only you and God may enter. Do not demand an answer before you breathe. Breathe, and you will become the kind of question that God delights to hold. This subtle shift, from demanding to allowing, from grasping to receiving, changes everything. When I stopped insisting that my spiritual life take a particular form, it began to reshape itself around a deeper truth. The silence was not the absence of God, but the presence of God in a form I had not yet learned to recognize. Like the negative space in a painting that gives meaning to what is visible, this apparent emptiness was essential to the composition of my soul's journey. In the ruins of trying, you will meet an old friend. My fall taught me what your fall will teach you. The ground is closer than you fear, and it can carry you. I once believed, as perhaps you do now, that spiritual maturity meant transcending difficulty, rising above the human condition into some perpetual state of peace. Now I know differently. It is not about escaping our humanity, but about embracing it completely, with all its shadows and light. The pathway to the divine does not bypass our wounds, our questions, or our darkest nights. It runs directly through them. The most sacred surrender happens not in the incense-filled temple, but in the ordinary moments when we release our grip on how things should be. I remember watching an old woman at the well in Kenya. Her back was bent, her hands gnarled from decades of work. As she drew water, she spilled some on her feet. Instead of frustration, a smile crossed her weathered face. "Allah's blessing," she murmured, feeling the cool water on her skin. In that moment, I glimpsed what true surrender looks like, this simple acceptance of what is, this recognition of grace in the unplanned moment. When the spiritual drought comes, and it will come to every sincere seeker, resist the temptation to force your way through it. Instead, try this practice that sustained me. Each morning, place your hand on your heart and speak this simple truth. I do not know the shape this day will take. I do not know how or when I will feel your presence. I only know that beneath all appearances, you remain. And that is enough. Then move through your day with this humble not knowing, this willingness to be surprised by grace in unexpected forms. The humility of surrender opens doors that spiritual ambition keeps firmly shut. When I finally accepted the silence, not as obstacle but as pathway, the quality of my prayers changed. They became less about what I wanted and more about simple presence, less about achieving states and more about honest communion. I stopped trying to curate my spiritual experience and began to trust the wild wisdom of a love larger than my understanding. La entrega no es rendición, sino reconocimiento de que un amor más sabio que mis planes me sostiene. My friend, your current darkness is not evidence of divine abandonment. It may be the necessary cocoon from which a more genuine faith will eventually emerge. Between your certainties, in the gaps of your understanding, a different kind of knowing is taking shape. It doesn't announce itself with trumpets. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed, like a change in the quality of silence. Trust this process. The ground of your being is held by hands more ancient and sure than your fear can comprehend. What feels like falling may be the beginning of being carried. Here is the turning, simple and demanding. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is staying. I do not wait for warmth to begin walking. I walk, and warmth finds me on the road. This is the thesis my bones learned, contrary to popular comfort, radiant in its plainness. In the markets of Kenya, I watched a craftsman hammer copper day after day, his rhythms unchanging through heat and cold, through profit and scarcity. One afternoon, I asked him, "How do you continue when inspiration leaves you?" He looked at me with gentle amusement. "Teacher," he said, "the copper does not care about my feelings. It responds only to my consistency." That night, those words echoed in my prayer. The human heart, like copper, is shaped not by our moments of ecstasy, but by our patient return to the anvil. You have been waiting perhaps for the feeling to arrive before beginning, waiting for certainty before commitment, waiting for clarity before action. I too lingered in this waiting, believing that spiritual maturity meant being carried by constant inspiration. After Shams disappeared, I expected my grief to subside quickly, for God to restore my sense of purpose with a dramatic intervention. I looked for signs, for voices, for confirmations. Meanwhile, the practices that had anchored me, the prayer before dawn, the mindful eating, the service to strangers, began to slip away. When I feel better, I told myself, I will return to discipline. But one morning, as the muezzin's call pierced the darkness, I forced my unwilling body from bed. My heart felt leaden, my spirit far from God. Yet I performed the wudu, the ritual washing, with mechanical motions. I stood on the prayer mat, reciting words that felt empty. Halfway through, tears came unexpectedly. Not tears of joy or connection, but simple recognition. This is what faith looks like when stripped of feeling. This showing up, this staying, this continuing when every internal signal says, retreat. In that moment, I understood. The discipline of the heart is not about manufacturing feelings, but about maintaining presence regardless of what we feel. 3 steps reshaped my days, and they will reshape yours if you practice them faithfully. The first is conscious silence. Sit for 10 minutes without performing. In the beginning, my mind would race with worries about the future, with plans to escape my pain. The silence felt like punishment. But gradually, I learned to observe these thoughts without following them. No rescue, no rehearsed speeches. Place your hand over your heart, listen to the inner weather. Say softly, speak, and I will be quiet. Let God's whisper be the teacher. Let your breath be the book. What you discover in this practice is that beneath the noisy current of thought and emotion, a deeper current flows, steady, patient, wise. This is not the silence of absence, but the silence of profound presence. The second step that transformed my journey was small daily order. After months of emotional chaos following the loss of Shams, my outer world had come to reflect my inner disarray. Scrolls scattered across the floor, meals taken at irregular hours, sleep arriving in fitful bursts. One morning, I bent to straighten a crooked prayer rug and felt a subtle shift within, as if the external action had adjusted something internal. From that day forward, I committed to one gesture of intentional order. I made my sleeping mat with care each morning, smoothing each wrinkle, aligning each corner. Choose one gesture of discipline that could fit inside a pocket. Make your bed with reverence, drink water before the screen, write 3 honest lines at dawn, stand up and stretch at the same hour. Keep it every day as if you were keeping a promise to a child. Order invites peace to land. It creates a stable ground where grace can accumulate. This is not about controlling the uncontrollable. It is about honoring the small territory where your will and God's will meet. El orden externo abre espacio para el orden interno. I found that as I maintained this one small discipline, other areas of my life began to align naturally, not through rigid enforcement, but through the gentle power of consistency. The third practice that steadied my wavering heart was service or gratitude. When loss had emptied me, I believed I had nothing to give. Yet my teacher had once told me, when you feel poorest, give from that poverty. One morning, seeing an elderly neighbor struggle with a heavy water jug, I took it from her hands. The simple act of service momentarily lifted me beyond my grief. The next day, I looked intentionally for someone to serve, not with grand gestures, but with the ordinary kindness possible. Even in depletion. Offer one act of love where you would rather be absent. Send a blessing to someone who will not know. Wash the cup as a prayer. Say thank you aloud for what you would otherwise overlook. Gratitude clears the windows of the heart. These are not grand steps, they are steady steps. Do them in exhaustion, in doubt, in quiet revolt. The soul is disciplined by tenderness. Keep going. There will be days when you forget, when old patterns reclaim territory you thought secured. Begin again without punishment. I spent a lifetime learning that spiritual growth is not linear progression, but faithful return. The question is not whether you will falter, but whether you will continue after faltering. God does not count your failures. He honors your perseverance. During a period when even these simple practices felt beyond my strength, I discovered a truth that carries me still. Discipline is a form of love, not a form of punishment. When I made my bed with care, I was loving my future self, who would return tired that night. When I practiced silence despite inner turbulence, I was creating space for a conversation deeper than my temporary distress. When I offered service from emptiness, I was affirming that generosity is my essence, not merely a response to abundance. La disciplina no es una jaula sino un camino hacia la libertad. You who read these words, you whose hands tremble some mornings, you whose breath catches with uncertainty, you who wonder if transformation is still possible in a life that feels derailed, I say to you with the authority of one who has both failed and continued. Begin with one small discipline. Not tomorrow when you feel stronger, not next week when circumstances improve. Today, in the exact conditions of your life as it stands, choose silence, order, or service. Do it imperfectly. Do it anyway. Trust not your fragile motivation, but the sturdy promise that consistent practice reshapes the heart's terrain more surely than any momentary inspiration. The holiest offering is not perfection, but persistence. When you return to practice after wandering, you create a path that others may follow. Your faithfulness becomes a thread in the fabric that holds this broken, beautiful world together. Remember what the copper taught me. The material of your life responds not to your feelings about the work, but to your steady presence at it. In this humble continuity, a sacred alchemy unfolds, the gradual transformation of habit into character, character into destiny, and destiny into the unique gift only your particular journey can offer the world. Constancy is the slow miracle. I did not wake to trumpets. I woke to a softer breath, a steadier gaze, a room that looked the same yet felt newly inhabited. The transformation you seek arrives not as lightning but as dawn, gradual, unannounced, visible only in retrospect. After months of faithful practice, the silence, the small order, the service, I found myself standing at the same window where I had once questioned God's presence, now aware of a subtle but unmistakable shift. The circumstances of my outer life remained largely unchanged. Shams had not returned. My responsibilities had not diminished. Yet something in the quality of my presence had altered, as if an inner light had adjusted its angle. When I kept silence, I began to hear. Not voices, not dramatic revelations, but the subtle language of existence itself, the rhythm beneath ordinary moments, the meaning woven into seemingly random encounters. One afternoon in the marketplace, as merchants called their wares and camels groaned under heavy loads, I suddenly perceived the entire scene as a single coordinated movement, a dance of provision in which nothing was separate, nothing accidental. My body registered this recognition before my mind could name it, a warmth spreading through my chest, a softening around my eyes, a sense of being both witness to and participant in a vast intelligence. When I practiced small order, my thoughts lined up like patient pilgrims. The mind that had scattered in 1,000 anxious directions began to demonstrate a new coherence. Questions that once tormented now rested in a larger context of trust. The future, which had loomed as a territory of threat, gradually revealed itself as a field of possibility. Even my memories, those wounds I had both avoided and clung to, began to arrange themselves into a story of guidance rather than a chronicle of loss. El orden exterior comenzó a reflejar un nuevo orden interior. This interior arrangement came not from philosophical insight, but from the humble discipline of making my bed each morning, of washing my bowl with full attention, of aligning my sandals beside the door each night. When I served quietly, my heart learned a language older than self-importance. Small gestures, carrying water for an elderly neighbor, listening without interruption to a child's rambling story, sweeping the path before the mosque so others might enter without distraction. These ordinary kindnesses gradually dissolved the hard shell of self-concern I had mistaken for protection. I discovered that service is not primarily about what we give to others. It is about the illusion it helps us shed, the illusion of separation, the fiction that your well-being and mine exist in competition rather than correspondence. I noticed light arriving earlier than before. The same window, the same street, and yet a lighter air, as if someone had opened a hidden door in the morning. This quality of attention, born of silence, nurtured by order, expressed in service, began to illuminate ordinary moments with extraordinary clarity. A cup of water tasted not merely like water, but like the culmination of rain, soil, and human effort spanning generations. A conversation with a stranger revealed patterns of divine orchestration too precise to be coincidence. Even difficulties, a fever, a financial setback, a misunderstanding with a friend, revealed themselves as teachers uniquely designed to address the exact questions my soul was asking. I found God returning in the smallest places, the rim of a cup, the crease of a smile, the pause between sentences. Or perhaps more accurately, I found my perception adjusting to recognize a presence that had never departed. Like eyes becoming accustomed to darkness, my spiritual senses adapted to perceive what had always been available but previously invisible to me. This shift did not announce itself dramatically. There was no single moment I could identify as transformation. Rather, I began to notice that reactions which once arose automatically, irritation, fear, judgment, now appeared with a slight space around them, a pause in which choice became possible. My work grew honest. Words that once flowed to impress or conceal now emerged from a deeper source. When I spoke in the mosque or the marketplace, I found myself saying things I had not planned, addressing wounds in my listeners I could not have known about through ordinary means. A kind of confidence arose, not in my abilities, but in the wisdom that moves through a vessel that has been emptied and prepared. Teaching became less about transmitting what I knew, and more about creating conditions where hearts could recognize what they had always known but forgotten. My relationships found gentler edges. Those who had known me before noticed something different, though they struggled to name it. Some said I seemed more peaceful, others said I appeared more fully present. What had changed was not my personality, but my relationship to it. I no longer needed to defend the persona I had constructed. I could allow myself to be seen more nakedly, with all my continuing struggles and imperfections. This vulnerability created space for others to remove their masks as well. La transformación verdadera te hace más humano, no menos. Even money, once a loud fear, began to arrive in ways that matched my integrity. Not abundance as spectacle, but sufficiency with dignity. As my work aligned more closely with my deepest values, I found that material needs were met without the desperate striving that had characterized earlier periods of my life. I neither pursued wealth nor rejected it as spiritual distraction. Instead, I came to recognize money as simply one form of energy exchange in a universe of continuous giving and receiving. When we serve authentically, the universe responds with support, sometimes through unexpected channels, always with perfect timing. Mantras rose from the work itself. El silencio fue mi maestro. Cuando ordené mi alma, la vida también se ordenó. Say them with me now, slowly, as you would turn a key. Silence, order, service. Again. Silence, order, service. These are not merely words, but gateways to experience. As you speak them, notice the subtle shift in your body, perhaps a deeper breath, a released tension in your shoulders, a slight lifting of your sternum. This physical response is the beginning of embodied wisdom, the knowing that penetrates beyond concept into cellular memory. Feel the spine lengthen, the jaw soften. Notice the thought that panicked you yesterday standing calmly outside today's door. This is the sign. The outer life begins to echo the inner arrangement. What you nourish in secret becomes the shape of your morning. The transformation you cannot force through willpower alone emerges naturally through faithful practice. The rose does not strive to become beautiful. It simply turns toward the sun, draws nourishment from the soil, and allows its inherent nature to unfold according to divine timing. For 7 days, I invite you to this experiment in attention. Each morning, immediately upon waking, place one hand on your heart and ask, "What small gift awaits my recognition today?" Then move through your hours with the curiosity of a child, alert to evidences of care planted in your path, a bird's song precisely when your thoughts grow heavy, a text message arriving at the moment of doubt, the particular quality of light on a familiar wall. Record these moments in a simple list, not to manufacture gratitude, but to train your perception toward what is already being given. This practice reshapes your attention, and attention shapes reality. What you consistently focus on expands in your experience, not through magical thinking, but through the natural law that we move toward what we repeatedly notice. When you train your awareness toward moments of grace, even tiny, ordinary moments, you become more receptive to the continuous stream of support that surrounds you. Donde pones tu atención, florece tu alma. The transformation comes both more gradually and more completely than you imagine. We expect dramatic conversions, emotional catharsis, visible miracles. Sometimes grace arrives in these forms, but more often, spiritual evolution happens like the heating of water, degree by imperceptible degree, until suddenly, crossing a threshold, the nature of the substance changes. One day you realize you have been carrying a weight that is no longer there. One day you notice you are breathing more deeply than before. One day you find yourself responding with compassion where once there would have been judgment. This is the sign. Not the disappearance of difficulty, but a new relationship with it. Not the absence of pain, but its integration into a larger story of meaning. Not constant ecstasy, but steady presence. The transformed heart is not one that no longer breaks. It is one that has learned how breaking and wholeness belong to the same mysterious process of opening. No es que el corazón ya no se rompa, es que ha aprendido cómo el romperse forma parte del abrirse. Now I speak from a quieter center. I am grateful, not because pain vanished, but because it taught me how to kneel without collapsing. The peace I discovered, and which awaits you still, is not the absence of difficulty, but a presence that encompasses both struggle and ease. It lives beneath the fluctuating circumstances of our days like an underground river, flowing quietly while storms rage on the surface. When I was younger, I thought spiritual maturity meant reaching a plateau where challenges no longer touched me. Now I understand that true maturity is not found in escape, but in deepening, not rising above human experience, but sinking roots through it into richer soil. I have known this. The wound can become a window, and through that window, the friend shines. Every loss that stripped me bare eventually revealed a facet of divine love I could not have perceived otherwise. The disappearance of shams, a pain I thought would destroy me, gradually transformed into the very catalyst that dissolved the barrier between myself and God. The poems that poured from that wound have touched countless hearts across centuries. This is not because I possessed special talent, but because suffering sincerely encountered always connects us to the universal. Your particular pain, when fully lived through rather than avoided, becomes a bridge to the pain of others, and paradoxically, to a joy deeper than circumstance. I am not wiser than you. I am simply more practiced at listening. The voice that speaks in silence has been teaching us both the same lessons, though we hear them through the unique instruments of our individual lives. That voice whispers, "Nothing is wasted. Nothing is permanent. Everything belongs." Even now, as you read these words, feeling perhaps the weight of what has been lost or the uncertainty of what awaits, something in you recognizes a truth older than your particular story. You have always known, beneath the noise of forgetting, that you are held in a love that precedes your existence and continues beyond your understanding. The moral is generous and spare. Pain purifies, silence teaches, and God does not move away. We move, and then we learn to return. This return is not a straight path, but a spiral, revisiting familiar terrain from higher ground. Each time you face a pattern you thought you had overcome, you are not merely repeating old lessons, you are encountering them with expanded capacity. The struggle that once seemed like failure reveals itself as sacred refinement. El dolor no es castigo sino invitación a una pureza más profunda. Your challenges are not punishment, but precisely calibrated opportunities to release what no longer serves the person you are becoming. Take this as blessing. El silencio también es una respuesta. In those moments when heaven seems deaf to your pleas, the silence itself carries wisdom your noise cannot yet hear. I spent years demanding that God speak in ways I could readily comprehend, not recognizing that some truths can only be communicated through apparent absence. The silence is not empty. It is pregnant with what your soul most needs to learn. Often this learning requires a quality of receptivity that our questions themselves prevent. When you cease demanding answers on your terms, you create space for revelation that transcends your current understanding. Take this as timing. Dios no tarda, tú estás aprendiendo a esperar. Divine timing moves according to the deeper rhythms of soul development, not the anxious pace of ego agenda. What appears as delay is often protection, preparing the ground for what would otherwise be lost on unprepared soil. During my years of searching after shams disappeared, I often raged at what I perceived as God's indifference to my suffering. Only later could I recognize how that period of emptiness was precisely what my soul required to break its dependence on external validation, even spiritual validation. The timing was impeccable, though my limited perception could not recognize it as such. Take this as mercy. Lo que el dolor no destruyó, lo purificó. The fire that does not consume you transforms you. Every trial that has not destroyed you has in fact been refining you, burning away what is non-essential to reveal the gold of your true nature. This purification is rarely comfortable, but it is always merciful when viewed from sufficient perspective. The parts of you that dissolve in difficulty were never load-bearing structures of your deepest identity. They were temporary scaffolding that served their purpose and now make way for more authentic expression. Let the words rest on your tongue until they open. Language enters through the mind, but must travel to the heart to become wisdom. These teachings are not concepts to be understood intellectually, but seeds to be planted in the soil of practice, watered with attention, and allowed to grow according to their own timing. Knowledge grasped only by the intellect changes little. Truth embodied through consistent action transforms everything. This is why the simple practices, silence, order, service, often accomplish more than years of philosophical study. The body knows what the mind often forgets. We become what we repeatedly do. Your action now is small and holy. Today, do one of these. Sit 10 minutes in conscious silence. Bring one piece of order to your space. Offer one hidden act of gratitude or service. Do it like a promise. Do it daily for 7 days. Then notice the floor of your soul becoming a steadier ground. These actions may seem insignificant against the scale of your challenges or aspirations. But remember, the mightiest trees grow from seeds so small a child could swallow them without notice. Spiritual transformation follows the same principle. Small, consistent actions creating invisible roots long before any change becomes apparent to observers. An aphorism for your pocket, born here, not borrowed. Where the mind breaks, the heart learns its true strength. Carry these words into moments when understanding fails. The limits of comprehension are not the limits of growth. They are its frontiers. When your mind can no longer make sense of circumstances, your heart is invited into a deeper kind of knowing, one that operates through trust rather than control, through surrender rather than strategy. This territory beyond understanding is where faith becomes more than concept. It becomes the very ground of being. Hoy, no pidas milagros, pide silencio y escucha. Allí, Dios te espera. The greatest miracle is not the dramatic intervention that changes external circumstances, but the quiet transformation that changes your relationship to all circumstances. God waits for you not in some distant future when conditions improve, but in this very moment. In the silence beneath your thoughts, in the space between your heartbeats, in the breath you are taking right now. The peace you seek is not something to be achieved, but something to be recognized as already present, though often veiled by the mind's constant commentary. I have learned this truth through both ecstasy and desolation. God is not a distant power to be summoned, but an intimate presence to be noticed. In my most difficult hours, when even prayer felt impossible, I discovered that simply turning attention toward this moment, feeling the texture of existence without labels or demands, was itself a form of communion deeper than words. This practice of presence gradually dissolves the illusion of separation that causes so much suffering. We do not need to bridge a gap between ourselves and the divine. We need only to recognize that no such gap exists except in thought. If this message resonated in your soul, subscribe and be part of this awakening journey. Each week I bring wisdom for those who chose the path of true transformation, and leave in the comments, "I embrace both my wounds and my light." This simple declaration marks the beginning of your journey back home, back to yourself. By acknowledging both your vulnerability and your radiance, you step onto the authentic path of integration, where spiritual growth happens not through denial of human experience, but through its complete embrace. Your comment becomes not just words on a screen, but a commitment to walking this path of wholeness with awareness and compassion. This is my final offering to you today. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of love within all experience. It is available not despite your circumstances, but within them, a dimension of being that remains untouched by the changing weather of events and emotions. You access this dimension not by forcing your way through spiritual practices, but by relaxing into what is already true. Beneath all appearances, you are held in a love older than time and wider than understanding. This love does not exempt you from human suffering, but it transforms that suffering from meaningless pain into sacred participation. Practice this remembrance as you move through your day. I am not alone in this. Everything I experience is shared by countless others across time and space. My particular path connects me to the universal human journey. This recognition dissolves the isolation that intensifies suffering. When you understand that your struggles are not punishment or anomaly, but part of the curriculum every soul encounters in different forms, a weight lifts. You are not singled out for pain. You are invited into the vulnerability that connects all living beings. In this connection, this recognition of shared humanity, peace takes root and begins to flourish. Remember, finally, that transformation is not a destination, but a continuing journey. There is no arrival point where difficulties cease and clarity becomes permanent. There is only the deepening capacity to be present to whatever arises, to respond from wisdom rather than reaction, and to recognize the sacred nature of every moment, painful or pleasant, challenging or easy. The peace that endures is not conditional on circumstance, but grounded in the unchanging presence that witnesses all circumstances. That presence is your essence, and it remains undamaged by whatever storms have passed through your life. Rest in this truth and let it become the foundation from which all action flows.